I'm Dr. Bertice Berry, and I want to tell you a story. It's a story about story and a man we think we know. Story is not just scientific, it's also got a mystical, spiritual, magical component. If you listen closely, you'll hear it. Sometimes when folks tell you a story you've already heard, there's a tendency to let them know. Oh, you told me. Oh, I've already heard that. You told me many times. But if you listen without interruption, you'll find some component that you never heard before. And if you allow that story to do what it does, you'll find that that's the component, the part that your heart so deeply needed. That's the case with stories of George Washington Carver. I grew up hearing about George Washington Carver. George Washington Carver and that peanut. Oh my Lord. From the time I could walk and talk, George Washington Carver was around. My mother would say things like, if George Washington Carver could do all that with a peanut, what do you think I could do with a potato? George Washington Carver was this amazing scientist. He was brilliant. He was born just before the Civil War. He had been enslaved, and he was one of the greatest minds that ever lived. If you don't know about him, please read about him. But too often we hear the story and we go, yeah, I know George Washington Carver. You know that peanut story, what he did with the peanut. A bajillion and one ways to use a peanut. But George Washington Carver also worked with Henry Ford. Henry Ford and Thomas Edison. He worked with Thomas Edison also. And those guys knew a brilliant scientist when they saw one, and they knew their work when they could steal it. Anyway, Ford worked out loud with Carver, and they worked in Dearborn, Michigan, but they also worked here in the town that I live in, just outside of Savannah. It's called Richmond Hill. It's really Richmond Hill. There is no hill, but there was a rich man, Henry Ford. And George Washington Carver worked with him, and they were working. Carver was working on an alternative fuel for the automobile, which, by the way, they found. And it worked. He also worked with President Roosevelt, and he worked with Gandhi. Gandhi had written to him to find something that he could. He was vegetarian, and he said, I need, a healthy diet that will help me through these times. He knew that he was going to face a great deal, and he needed something to shore up his physical self. And for years, Gandhi and George Washington Carver wrote back and forth about the use of soybean or tofu in the diet for protein, and wheat flour, and all these things that are now a part of Indian diet that no one questions, that George Washington Carver helped to create and carve out for the school system, for the national diet. It's absolutely amazing. He did so much work on so many things. He taught at Tuskegee University. He loved Tuskegee. But when you only hear the story and you stop at, oh, I already know, I know this story, you miss all of the beautiful components that we so desperately need. So the next time you hear a story that somebody's already told you, listen for the piece that your heart needs to hear. It may just be that peanut. I love you.